under General Douglas MacArthur of the United States Army. The UN was setting up their command center in North. As the UN was setting up their command center in North, the North Koreans were rapidly advancing through the valleys and rice paddies of the Korean peninsula. The capital of South Korea was occupied by the North Koreans on the 20th of June, and by the beginning of August, the UN forces were confined within the Pusan perimeter, a small section of the Korean peninsula in the southeast. The situation was bleak when on September 15th, when a successful Allied assault included an amphibious assault in Incheon. Incheon is the port of the South Korean capital, Seoul. This landing assault was a breakout to the Pusan bridgehead, changed the strategic situation pretty much overnight. The successful operation led to the North Korean retreat. The UN forces then moved quickly north, recapturing Seoul, then crossed the 38th parallel. The advance continued towards the border of Manchuria, now China. As this was going on, the Chinese began preparing an assistance for the besieged North Koreans. Then at the end of November, the communist Chinese forces crossed the Korean frontier. The Chinese launched a large-scale offensive that drove the UN forces and the South Koreans back across the 38th parallel to positions along the Imjin River. The Government of Canada agreed in principle to the moves, made an effort to stop the aggression, but didn't immediately send Canadian forces into the action. The reason for this was that after the Second World War, the military was reduced to a peacetime strength. The strength of the regular army was 20,369 of all ranks, both officers and NCOs, non-commissioned officers. They were specially trained for the defense of Canada, which is a lot of problem in one of my other videos I might do. The Far East was an area which Canada had never any special interest nationally, as after Hong Kong. The first Canadians that were deployed to aid the UN in Korea came in the form of the Royal Canadian Navy. On the 12th of July, HMCS Keuta, the HMCS Athabaskan, and the HMCS Sioux were sent to the waters around the Korean peninsula to serve under the United Nations. These three Canadian destroyers supported the landings on Incheon and played an important role in the evacuation after the Chinese launched the attack in November. During the retreat, a body of American troops was cut off in the area of Chimpano. The Canadian destroyers, along with an Australian and American destroyer, negotiated the difficult Taedong River to cover the evacuation of the troops successfully. In July, the Royal Canadian Air Force 426 Squadron was assigned to transport duties to the UN. 426 Squadron regularly flew scheduled flights between Washington McChord Air Force Base and Haneda Airfield, Tokyo, all through the campaign. On the 7th of August 1950, as the crisis in Korea was deepening, the Canadian government allowed for the recruitment of a Canadian Army Special Force. It was to receive specialized training and to be equipped to carry out Canada's obligations to both the United Nations and NATO. NATO is also known as Northern Extreme Organization, as most people would already know, through the mission in Afghanistan. The original elements of this new force were from the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment, the RCR, the Princess Pass, the Canadian Light Infantry, and the Royal 22nd Regiment, Royal Canadian Engineers, 57th Canadian Independent Field Squadron, 2nd Field Regiment, the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, the 25th Canadian Infantry Brigade Signal Squadron, the number 54 Canadian Transport Company, the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, the RCASC, the number 25 Field Ambulance, Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, RCMAC, and the Lord Strathcona's Horse Sea Squadron. The next day, August 8, 1950, Brigadier General J.M. Rockingham accepted the command of the Canadian Infantry Brigade. However, there was some optimism that the war was going to be over soon, following the successful landing in Incheon, as well as success that the UN was having in September and into October. Instead of a full brigade, the 2nd Battalion, the Princess Pat's Canadian Light Infantry Division, left for Korea under the command of Lieutenant Colonel J.R. Stone. By the time of the Princess Pass arrived in Yokohama on the 14th of December, the situation changed for the worse. The Communist Chinese intervened on the 26th of November 1950 in light of the disaster. The focus then became how fast we can get the Canadians into action. The Princess Pats, as they arrived, began a highly intensive training program at Miryang, that's near Taegu. While they were there, they were also engaging in action against guerrilla activities in the area. By the middle of February 1951, the 2nd Battalion of the Princess Pats took its place on the line as part of the 27th Commonwealth Brigade, in time for them to become involved in the general advance towards the 38th parallel. This was a difficult time for the brigade as the terrain was rugged and bitterly cold weather. Even though the Chinese were withdrawing, there were still a number of encounters with the Chinese. By the end of February, the Canadian contingent made contact with the enemy for the first time. It was such that the Canadian Corps suffered their first casualties in the hills of Korea. By the end of March, the Canadian troops began entering the Kaiping Valley. By the middle of April, the UN forces were positioned on the Kansas line north of the 38th parallel. On a side note, while the United Nations were repositioning, General Douglas MacArthur was relieved of his command and replaced by a more by-the-book officer, Lieutenant General General Matthew B. Ridgway. There was some speculation that the Chinese were in preparation for another offensive that was designed to keep the United Nations advanced in check. This all came on the 27th of April 1951. The engagement that followed was one of the most severe of the Korean War. During the night of the 22nd and 23rd of April, the enemy forces attacked the western and west central zone. The attack was by the 6th Republic of Korea Division. Overwhelmed and forced into retreat, what was in danger of being cut off and destroyed completely. The task of the Commonwealth Division was to hold the route open for the withdrawal through the Kaiping Valley and prevent a serious infiltration of the enemy in that sector. The 2nd Princess Pass established a defense perimeter on Hill 677 with the 1st Middlesex Regiment on the left and the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment on the right. That was actually the one I was mentioning before in Korea, where they had the gun incident. It was 51. So I remember it was the Royal Australians were right on that. They finish this off. During the parts of the action, they had to be supplied via airdrop. They defended a height of Hill 677 for 2 days and a night of very heavy fighting. The Princess Pat lost 10 men killed and another 23 wounded. For their heroic action, both the 2nd Princess Pats and the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment received a U.S. Presidential Unit Citation. Okay, well, this video is getting long, but I'll sum this up right now and I'll continue with the next one. Basically a lot what I was saying there is basically general summary of what happened. It's not detailed, it's just rough summary. That it's good to know. I'm trying to put the information about the Korean War out there. There's a lot of videos on YouTube I've seen about the Korean War. This is from my own personal research for my book, so yeah, it's much of the information I can verify. It's verified accurately. I'm going to probably talk to the Veterans Affairs Council eventually and see if it's actually 100% to their liking and if factual. So this is end of part 5, and we'll continue on with the rest of the Korean War for part 6. Thank you, and hope you enjoyed.